G'day! It's another episode of A Closer Look at the Book, and today I want to talk a little bit about the wisdom literature. Now this is a funny kind of group of books right in the middle of your Old Testament. It's got Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon, and it's this fairly kind of diverse collection of books. Because at one end you've got Job, which is a story of a guy who actually does nothing wrong, but because God and Satan seem to be having this kind of wager going on, his life falls apart, and then he spends a bunch of time arguing with his friends about why this has happened. Through to Song of Solomon, which is actually Hebrew erotic love poetry, as you'd expect. Psalms is a whole lot of songs and prayers of David and a whole group of other people from within Israel, kind of expressing their heart and the things that they're feeling to God. And sometimes in praise, sometimes in lament, sometimes they're just really angry. So interesting, even just within Psalms. Proverbs is a whole bunch of wisdom sayings, kind of saying that if you do this, your life will go well, or if you do this, this is what's likely to happen. And then Ecclesiastes is Solomon, who is actually quite involved in Proverbs as well, looking back at a life where he's tried both that wisdom, and it hasn't always worked, but also tried foolishness and realized that doesn't work either. And so just kind of weighing up what is it that it's good to do. So really, really interesting collection of books. I'm not going to be able to cover a lot with them, but I guess the main things in terms of how we read them, we'll kind of have a quick look. I'll start with Song of Solomon because it's probably easiest. Now this is actually, it's a celebration of kind of love, both kind of emotional and physical, between this couple. And one of the big themes that flows through it are these warnings to keep love in its proper context. And so that it is God honoring, it is honoring of your partner, it is something that you can celebrate and enjoy together, but in its right context, in its right setting. And so also in there's some fantastic pickup lines, some which work really well now, like you are altogether beautiful, there is no flaw in you, and others that don't. Your nose is like the Tower of David. So you need to pick and choose a little bit. But just that, I guess the overall message there is that love is to be enjoyed, but in its proper context. It says, do not awaken love until it so desires, within that proper kind of boundary that it fits. At the other end, we've got Job. Job's quite a long book, and there's a lot of kind of arguing and going backwards and forwards on things. But I guess the main thing here is that Job's friends that come along and argue with him, they're all saying, look, if bad things happen to you, you must have done something wrong. And some of the time that's true. In this case, it's not. And Job stands on his integrity and he says, you know what, I'm actually going to let God judge me. And I don't think that anyone else can. I've examined myself and I've done my best, and I don't think that I've deserved what's happened to me. And eventually God comes and he doesn't actually answer any of that stuff. He just kind of points out that none of them can assume to know what he thinks or does, but that there is value in seeking him, there is value in obeying him, there is value in being his. And so Job is quite complex because often Job's friends sound quite reasonable, and what they're saying kind of feels right, but then Job argues back and says, but I haven't done anything. Where is all this coming from? But he keeps coming back to, like, I'm going to trust God with this, and all the way through he chooses to trust God. Proverbs can be a bit tricky because while all of the wisdom sayings in here are generally true, and are what you'd expect to happen, it's not a cast iron guarantee that this is what's going to happen. And just as an example, and this can be one of the more painful ones, there's a proverb that says that if you raise your children up in the right way, they will not stray from it when they're older. And this is incredibly painful for people because there's great parents who've raised their children in all the right ways and taught them all the right things, and their kids go off track. And this proverb still remains true. Generally, that's the case. But see, Proverbs doesn't so much rely on God's faithfulness as it does on people's choices. And wisdom only works when we make the right choices. And so people can choose to go the wrong way, to do the wrong things, to walk away from wisdom. And there's lots of examples through the book of Proverbs about people who do that and what happens. But just because Proverbs says it doesn't mean it's a cast iron guarantee. It's just what you would expect if you do the right thing reasonably consistently. You would expect this is what's going to happen at the end. Now, Psalms gets a bit messy as well, but primarily because we need to understand it as kind of song and poetry, and it's not really our kind of poetry. So Hebrew poetry uses a lot of repetition, a lot of kind of lines that echo each other, and lots of kind of metaphor and and of course all sorts of different things. So we need to read it very carefully, because while it is true, the way that it is true is a little bit different. So, for example, there's quite a well-developed argument all the way through Psalms that God is a rock, figuratively, because it's not an argument saying that God is literally a rock, even though God's rockness is described in a whole different ways. He's a rock that is taller than I. He's a rock that cannot be moved. All these different things. That doesn't actually make him a rock. Seems obvious, but we get into trouble if we try and take it too literally. But that sense of God being this stable and secure place, this place of safety, this place of refuge, that is true. And that's what David's trying to say when he says God is a rock. So we need to kind of get that this is metaphor, and this is, I guess, sense making in a different kind of way. The other thing is you'll often see what's called a parallelism, just a nice big word. Two lines in a row that say almost the same thing, but not quite. Don't try and get them to say two different things. They are both kind of lending their strength to the same idea. So often you'll see pairs of statements within a single verse, or sometimes spread over a couple of verses, that seem to say nearly the same thing but not quite. Basically, it's just lending that that's, I guess, breadth of sense to that one statement. So you can spot those sometimes. Another thing that catches people a little bit is that, especially in what's called an imprecatory psalm, it's a fancy word that means it's a really angry one, that the author sometimes says some terrible things. There's one where it finishes with, happy is the man who dashes their children against the rock, talking about one of the enemies of Israel. This is not permission for that to happen. This is someone sharing their heart and their hurt and the emotion that goes with it, and just pouring that out and kind of expressing it to God. But it's not permission. It's not saying this is the right thing to happen. It's just this person being really honest about what they feel like they want to happen right now. And so there is a sense that they actually want vengeance. But it doesn't mean that's what has to happen. And really interesting, in most of the lament psalms, where there's this real honesty about these people who are really suffering and feeling terrible, but then they keep choosing to focus back on God and trusting Him for what He's going to do. And in the last book that I haven't kind of touched on, again, it's Ecclesiastes. And so here it's Solomon, who's lived this long life and been on track and off track and seen different things. And he's just kind of really working through what it means and how it works. And I guess his point comes back to we can do right, we can do wrong. God is going to call us into account for all of those things. God's given us lots of things that we can do and enjoy and try, but we do need to do that, again, within sensible boundaries. It links in quite well with what's going on in the Song of Solomon. And as you read Ecclesiastes, you quite see that sometimes Solomon can be quite cynical about things. Sometimes he can be a little bit hopeless around stuff. But he does come back to that that what is worthwhile is what we owe to God and what He gives to us. But if we devote our energy to things that are disconnected with what God wants or how He wants us to do things, then they end up being meaningless in the end. So the wisdom books, they can be really helpful, they can be really valuable, but you need to kind of get what kind of writing they are, just to make sure that you don't, I guess, overstep what they're trying to say. When you're trying to make Psalms too concrete, or you're trying to make Proverbs into a concrete promise. If you're trying to work out, what am I supposed to do leading out of Song of Solomon? I don't know. When you've got these arguments in Job that sound reasonable but that just don't quite work. And in Ecclesiastes, where you're dealing with a guy who's really struggled himself. So talk them over with people, get a sense of what's going on, and you'll be able to get the most out of them. Thanks, team. See you later.